My name is Izzy Cooper, and I have been attending South Hills for about a year now at the Costa Mesa campus.
So Izzy,
Okay.
tell me how you first found South Hills Church.
I actually found South Hills Church on Instagram because it was around Easter and I saw a ad for a dog Easter egg hunt. To be honest, I didn't really know it was a church. I was not looking for a church, but I went and I met so many kind and welcoming people who invited me to Easter service. I had just gone through the worst breakup of my life. I was in the very beginning stages of getting a divorce. So I was just at such a low point in my life where I felt so worthless. I felt unlovable, and quite frankly, I felt like I had no one and nothing. For some reason, I woke up the next day and decided to go. I walked into the building. I didn't feel uncomfortable. I felt so welcomed. They recognized me, which was so nice. They actually remembered my name. I felt at home as soon as I walked in the door. I was looking for community, so I felt like I had found what I was looking for, and I wanted to be a part of that. I knew it was time to take that next step of committing my life to God. My divorce finalized on February 19th this year. And I was like, if South Hills decides the 18th is Baptism Sunday, I'm getting baptized. Lo and behold, that Sunday was Baptism Sunday. So I was like, okay, I hear you, God. I hear you loud and clear. It's time.
If you were going to give someone advice that's listening to your story, but what would you say to them?
You get what you put into it. The more that I pour into my relationship with God, the more I see what He's given me, and the more I realize I don't even know how much He loves me.
What do you think is next?
I feel God calling me to share my story with others and help others know and understand the love He has for us. I think you just have to take that first step. It brought me so much peace. It brought me freedom, and it taught me what love should actually be.
But we're going to go ahead and dive into the scriptures this morning. I don't know if you've ever had that moment when you were a kid where you would buy a toy. There was a toy that you desperately wanted, and you wanted it, and you wanted it, and you asked your parents, or you saved up your money for it, and then you got it, and it was a complete and total letdown. Anybody ever have that experience? I had that experience a ton. So I grew up in the 80s, which meant that I loved the Transformers. But also we were poor. And so we did the ghetto version, which was GoBots. Anybody remember GoBots? Heck yeah, ghetto version Transformers. Absolutely. And we watched the cartoon all the time, me and my brother. And the toys looked awesome on TV, but they didn't fly, and they didn't light up, and they didn't shoot anything like they did in the commercials. And I remember getting them, and I was so disillusioned. I actually remember being angry about it. And the truth is, like, life can actually be like that sometimes. And maybe it's like that most of the time, to be honest. And nothing ever lives up to the hype. In fact, as a Dallas Cowboys fan, I'm extremely aware of that reality. And part of it is that in our culture, we're always being sold, right? Like there's always an agenda, there's always an angle. We're always being told about the next greatest this or the life-changing that. And everything is being marketed and sold to us. And when I had that GoBot moment as a kid, I remember complaining to my older brothers they're quite a bit older than me. And I remember them just being like, what are you, an idiot? You actually thought it was going to do that stuff? Like, of course that's the way it is. You thought it was going to be like the commercial. They just wanted your money. And I realized, like, in some ways, growing up kind of feels like this long, slow realization that nothing is ever as good as you thought it was going to be. And those experiences definitely changed how we look at the world and how we look at ourselves. But still, we can't seem to help ourselves. We keep falling for these things over and over and over again. Anybody remember the fat-free craze in the 90s and the early 2000s, where there was just this boom, like everything was fat-free. It was the same food, only now it's fat-free, and we were all in. Like everybody went all in. Everybody was making it. It was like taking up huge amounts of space on all the shelves. And we ate things that tasted terrible because they told us they were fat-free and they wouldn't make us fat, they would make us skinny. But it turned out it was just a scam. Like everything was loaded with sugar. And so it was like a lose situation because the food tasted worse, it was worse for us, and it was more expensive than just the regular stuff. Or how about the housing market bubble and the crash that happened in 2008? I mean, people were like, yeah, I mean, it makes sense that I could totally buy a $500,000 house with no money down and no income. Like, I'm sure the banks know what they're doing. These guys do it all the time. It'll be fine. And then it turned out they weren't helping us. They were helping themselves, right? And it seems to be like that's the way it is with most things. And then there's church and there's faith and there's religion. And we've all heard and seen the stories. Maybe you've even experienced them, where there was some leader, some religious guru who said one thing and then did another. Some pastor that took advantage of people or manipulated situations for their own gain. It turned out in the end, they were working angles just like everybody else. I mean, if there's any area of life that makes these grand pronouncements and over-promises and yet under-delivers on a regular basis, it seems like it's religion. And that's just the people. Those are just the leaders, right? We haven't even talked about all the stories and the legends and the things that we're told we need to believe. And so the more we have these experiences in our life, the more skeptical, the more jaded we become. And so we keep our guard up and we say things like, well, there's a sucker born every minute, or you don't get your hopes up. If it seems too good to be true, it probably is, right? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And there's a word for all of this, and that word is cynicism. It's the belief that you can't trust anybody because everyone always has an ulterior motive and they're only out for themselves. It's the assumption that when push comes to shove, the only person you can ever truly trust or count on is you. That everything and everyone, no matter how good they seem, will eventually let you down. They will burn and betray you. And so when you look around our culture especially, everybody kind of seems caught in between like two extremes, whether one is outrage or the other is just like, meh. You know, this thing is awesome, meh. There I get the greatest experience of all time, like, meh, I don't know, it was all right. They're either self-righteously calling out like everybody, every hypocrisy and failure of everyone else, or they're just sort of actively withdrawing and disengaging, and sometimes both. Turns out that cynicism is contagious, and almost all of us have been infected. We have. Because it's a coping mechanism that we use to protect ourselves from being lied to or misled or taken advantage of. And honestly, I get it. We don't set out to be that way, but people and life happen. And the truth is that every single one of us, every human being, has three giant needs in their life. We have the need to believe in something. We have the need to belong to something. We have the need to become something. It doesn't matter who you are. It doesn't matter what you believe about God. It doesn't matter where you're at in terms of religion. It doesn't matter what you think about Jesus or Easter or the Bible. Those three things are hardwired into who we are, which honestly kind of feels like a setup because it really makes us vulnerable to people selling us, to the hard sell. Also, people are just kind of stupid and jerk faces sometimes, and sometimes they're both. Sometimes they're stupid jerk faces. And it's no wonder we're cynical. I mean, most cynics usually have some pretty good reasons how they got that way. They had real experiences that led them there. Because we don't like or want to have to admit that other people have the ability to hurt us. Or that no matter how smart and how savvy we are, that sometimes we still get duped, sometimes we still get fooled. Or that we don't always know what we're doing, that we don't always have all the answers. Or even worse, we don't want to have to admit that we're the jerk face sometimes. That not everything is all everybody else's fault, and we actually have some ownership, not just in our life, but in the breakdown of how things go for us in our relationships. We don't want to have to admit that no matter how hard we try, we can't fix what's broken about us by ourselves. Now, none of this is really new or unique to the human experience. In fact, it's been this way all along. And when you look at the scriptures, they actually record the moment that all of this began, the moment that cynicism entered our story and our souls got poisoned. And it happened all the way back at the very beginning, not the beginning of God's story, but the beginning of our story with God. So when you open the scriptures in the opening scene in Genesis, God creates humanity and he makes this paradise and he creates us and he places humanity in a paradise. And everything was perfect and it was beautiful, but into the midst of that situation, the voice of the serpent, the voice of cynicism speaks up. And listen to what it says in the most perfect paradise that ever existed in Genesis 3, verses 1-6. Did God really say that you must not eat from the tree in the garden? The woman said, well, we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden, but God did say you must not eat fruit from the tree that is in the middle of the garden, and you must not even touch it or you will die. You will not certainly die, the serpent said, for God knows that when you eat from it, your eyes will be opened and you will be like God, knowing good and evil. And when the woman saw that the fruit of the tree was good and for food, and it was pleasing to the eye, it was also desirable for gaining wisdom, that she took some and she ate it. She also gave some to her husband who was with her, and he ate it. Did you catch it? Right? In other words, the voice comes and says, look, God's been holding out on you. I don't know what you think he told you. I don't know what he told you, but he's got different motives than he's not really being honest. You can't trust him. He's betrayed you because he's afraid of you. He's afraid of what you would become. He doesn't want to have to, he doesn't want you to have any of the good stuff. He says he's looking out for you, but he's really just looking out for himself. He's working an angle. Isn't it interesting that even in a paradise, even in perfection, that we could still be like this, that the voice, the cynical voice could come and lead us away from life? Have you ever known anybody that has that ability to they can find the dark cloud in every silver lining? They can pull despair out of the happiest moment. They can suck the life right out of the room. They can sabotage the very best situations, not realizing that the cynicism and the negativity and the distrust and the mess is of their own making. It's coming from the poison in their own soul. See, as much as we want to blame it on everything and everyone else, our most cynical moments, if we're honest, they're really about us. Oof. I mean, talk about a gut punch. That God set us up for the win and we chose to lose. We chose ourselves and our way. And in the process, we cut ourselves off from the one who didn't just make us, but the one who's the source of everything that's good and beautiful and wonderful, the source of love and joy and peace and hope. So a few verses later in this story, God speaks into the mess that we created, and he's not angry, he's not vengeful, he's not disgusted. He actually comes and speaks with love, and he promises hope. And so right from the beginning and the very opening story, God points to Jesus generations and generations and generations later. See, what you begin to see when you read the scriptures is that the story of humanity is one of cynicism and tragedy, but that the story of God is one of hope and beauty. If you look at your life, they start to get woven together. And we keep being pulled between those two extremes, between us choosing cynicism and darkness and tragedy and pain, and a God who refuses to write us off and keeps drawing us towards light and life and hope. One of the amazing things about God is that he's not afraid of our struggle. He's not afraid of how broken and cynical we are. He doesn't run from it. He doesn't cover over it. In fact, the scriptures, the pages of scripture are full of moments that echo our side of the conversation. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it was written by a king who was named Solomon, and he wrote it towards the end of his life. And the book is maybe the most cynical and fatalistic piece of literature in the scriptures. And as he's writing, he actually calls himself the teacher, which is kind of funny because I think that's what cynicism actually does. It always masquerades as wisdom. It always pretends that it's doing the things that it's doing because it's just learned better. And so it justifies its behaviors. It justifies its cynical heart. When you read Ecclesiastes, he's also torn. So he starts out saying things like this in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, verse 2. He says, this is the way he begins his book. Everything is meaningless, says the teacher. Completely meaningless. I bet this guy is fun at parties, man. Like, whoo! Don't go talk to Solomon. You will walk away depressed. But then there's other times where he cannot deny the goodness in his experience with God. In Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 11, he says, God has made everything beautiful in its own time. He's planted eternity in the human heart. And yet people cannot see the scope of what he's doing, of God's work from the beginning to end. We actually can't make sense of it. And so he's going all throughout the book, he's being pulled. He's like going, there's this gravitational pull on my soul towards destruction and dysfunction and despair and cynicism, that I'm just tempted over and over and over again to throw my hands up and live however I want to live for today, to just live for pleasure, to live for like this is the only time that counts, that there's nothing else because it's all meaningless anyway. But there's also this voice that keeps telling me that there's more to life than I can see, that God is doing something that I'm not aware of, that there's a voice that keeps calling me to more, calling me to a life of beauty and wonder and love. And so over and over and over again, we see that the human narrative is constantly pulled back and forth between the two, between choosing ourselves and trying to find our way back to the one who's the only source of life. And all of it comes to a head in Jesus. And so when we see Jesus come on the scene in the New Testament, when he's born and he lives, he's described as light and life. He's described as being full, overflowing with grace by those who saw him and knew him. They describe him that he didn't just have love, he is love, that he was love with skin on. Also that we killed him. So Luke actually tells us the story of how it goes. What happened when he got arrested and how we came to kill love. In Luke 23, he says this. He says, two others, both criminals, they were led out to be executed with him. When they came to the place called the Skull, they nailed him to the cross, and the criminals were also crucified, one on his right and one on his left. And Jesus said, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. And the soldiers gambled for his clothes by throwing dice, and the crowd watched, and the leaders scoffed. He saved others, they said. Let him save himself if he's really God's Messiah, the chosen one. And the soldiers mocked him too by offering him a drink of sour wine. And they called out to him, if you're the king of the Jews, save yourself. And one of the criminals hanging beside him scoffed, so you're the Messiah? Prove it by saving yourself, and while you're at it, save us too. But the other criminal protested. Don't you fear God even when you're being sentenced to die? We deserve to die for our crimes, but this man hasn't done anything wrong. And then he said to Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus replied to him, I assure you, today you'll be with me in paradise. I mean, talk about an ugly scene. You might know the particulars of the story, but did you see it? See, executions are always violent and disturbing, but this one is particularly brutal. There's a bloodthirsty mob that railroads an innocent man. He's blamed and he's tortured. And as he's being tortured and put to death, people are laughing and they're mocking. A crowd looks on in sort of a sick curiosity. The soldiers are gambling for his clothes. The leaders and the soldiers scoff and hurl insults at him. I mean, it really doesn't get any darker. It really doesn't get any more cynical than to be looking at an innocent man being crucified and to mock him. I mean, that's pretty darn cynical. But then right in the middle of it, Jesus does one of the most extraordinary, powerful, beautiful things that's ever been done. In spite of what's being done to him, he prays for their forgiveness. He prays that God would not hold it against them. I mean, can you imagine right in the moment that he's being tortured and executed, he prays for the people who are torturing him and executing him? Whether he was God or not, you got to admit, that's pretty extraordinary. See, the cross was this collision of cynicism and hope. It was a collision of God's story crashing into ours. It was darkness and light. It was beauty and tragedy all coming together in a single moment. Have you ever had an experience where you were convinced that something was exactly the opposite of reality? Where reality was one way, but you were certain that it was 180 degrees from that. Have you ever had that? So I grew up in a family where we didn't eat steak that often because we were poor. We had GoBots, not Transformers. But when we did eat steak, it was always well done because my mom would always buy like the really, really cheap cuts of meat. And so I grew up thinking that that was the best way to eat steak. No blood, no pink, well done. If you think that, you are mistaken. And so I was in college and I was at a friend's house and his dad was actually grilling some steaks. And they had the nerve to not ask me how I wanted mine prepared. And so we sat down to dinner and they put this piece of meat on my plate right in front of me. And it was super pink and it looked disgusting. He told me it was medium. And I was like, oh, it's going to get up and walk off my plate. I objected, but it didn't matter. They forced it on me. And I was upset, but I didn't want to be rude, so I decided to eat it. And when I put that first bite in my mouth, the heavens opened and the angels threw a party on my taste buds. And I found the Lord. It was awesome. I had been wrong all along. See, it's possible for us to look at a situation and see it completely backwards. And so we look at this moment in the story and Jesus is hanging on a cross and it looks like weakness, but in reality it was ultimate power. It looked like defeat, but in reality it was overwhelming victory. It looked like hope being crushed, but in reality it was just love being poured out for all of humanity. And so Jesus prays, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they're doing. And it's unbelievable that he would say such a thing on its face. But beyond that, I think it's also Jesus saying, look, you guys are not taking my life. I'm laying it down. You're not taking anything from me. I'm giving it all up. See, God, it turns out, is the king of the plot twist. I mean, just think about this. Here we are 2,000 years later, and the cross, one of history's greatest symbols of death and darkness and defeat, the symbol at the center of our humanity's most broken and cynical moment, is actually now a symbol of faith and hope and love. What was once despised is now celebrated. What was once held in nothing but shame, now people wear around their necks. Only Jesus could do that. And then you have the two criminals. I've always been intrigued by the criminals that were there on the cross next to him. See, there were two people who had a front row seat to Jesus' final moments before his death, but it wasn't his family, it wasn't his friends, it wasn't even his disciples, it was two criminals. But we don't even really know who they are. We don't know any of the details of their lives or their families. Although some translations call them thieves, we actually don't know the nature of their crimes. We don't even know their names. Isn't that crazy? That their whole lives, the sum total of who they were, was summarized by the worst thing that they had ever done. And so one of the criminals, he joins in with the mocking of the crowd. He's hardened and cynical like they are. And truthfully, there's part of me that gets it. Right? And the time that was leading up to the life of Jesus, there had been a long line of failed messiahs. A long line of people who came and they were like, oh, this is the one, he's the one, he's the one. And then he would die in some battle, or he'd die in some obscure thing, or they'd kill him off, and it was like, oh, he's not the one. And so over and over and over again, there had been religious leaders who had inspired people and gotten their hopes up, only for them to crash and burn and leave everybody in despair and disillusionment. And so they're looking at Jesus in this moment, and they're going, here we go again. And so there's part of them that's like, oh, no. Like, you're not doing that to me this time. You're not going to get me this time. I knew this was going to happen. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And when you think about it, honestly, underneath their ridicule, underneath the mocking and the taunts is really a reasonable question, I think. Right? If you can't save yourself, how the heck are you going to save us? I think it's incredible that even in our most jaded and fatalistic moments, we're still desperately crying out for hope. Desperate. That even when we shake our fists at the heavens and declare that God is dead and that we don't need saving, that we're dying for someone, for anybody to come and save us from ourselves. And so the criminal on the cross is looking at Jesus and he's like, dude, you're the Messiah? I mean, seriously, look around, man. You're hanging on a cross just like me, and I'm just a common criminal. If you can't save yourself, how are you going to save us? And there was no room in his cynical mind or heart to imagine that the way that Jesus would save us was not by saving himself, but by sacrificing himself for us. And then you have the other criminal. Isn't it strange how two people can step in to the exact same moment, at the exact same time, in the exact same situation, and have completely different experiences and perspectives? So the second criminal somehow gets it. And so he reaches out, desperate, cries out to Jesus in a desperate faith and a desperate hope. And he says, remember me. What an interesting thing for him to say. Remember me when you come into your kingdom. And their exchange, it looks like a conversation, but it was really a prayer, because that's really all that prayer is, a conversation with God. And so he's going, I know this looks hopeless and I can't see how it's all going to shake out, but I know who you are. And I don't know how or why that you're going to do it, but I believe that you are the Messiah, that you are God, that you're God's final king. So remember me when you come into your kingdom. And Jesus answers his prayer with a beautiful promise. He says, I assure you that today you're going to be with me in paradise. I love that he starts that way. Truly, I tell you, I assure you. He's going, you can bank on it. I know that you've had a lot of things promised to you, and none of them came true. I know you had a lot of people who told you that you could trust them, and they all betrayed you. But you can bank on this. I know you've been hurt and betrayed and let down over and over and over again. I know it'd be so easy for you to join the cynical crowd, but I'm telling you, this is a rock solid hope that you can count on. I assure you. Today, you'll be with me in paradise. See, here's the thing. Hope only exists in the future. It cannot exist in the past. That's regret. Hope only exists in the future. And guess who's the only one that's waiting for you where hope is? Jesus. He's the only one in your past, the only one in your present, and the only one in your future. And then eyewitnesses tell us that all three men die. They're all buried. But 3 days later, the man in the middle, he came back to life, just like he predicted, just like he said he would. And it was only then that his followers began to realize that he wasn't a fake, that he wasn't a fraud, He wasn't a phony. More importantly, it wasn't just them, it was doubters and skeptics and even cynics. You had soldiers and tax collectors and Samaritans who discovered that Jesus was who he said he was, that he could be trusted. And so at first hundreds and then thousands and then tens of thousands and then millions of people came to believe that their hope was not wasted on this guy named Jesus. See, the beautiful truth of Jesus' story is that the power of his resurrection isn't just that Jesus came back to life, although that is huge. But if it means nothing for us, it's just kind of a cool trick. The power of Easter, the power of resurrection is that because he came back to life, he can bring anything and anyone back to life, including a broken, fragile, scared, hope-starved heart like yours and like mine. Like the girl in the video that we saw at the very beginning. It means that no matter how dark life gets, that there's always hope. It means that death is swallowed up in life, that our cynicism melts away in the face of God's overwhelming love. I don't have time to tell you the whole story, but there was a guy named Paul who had made himself an enemy of Jesus and his movement. And after Jesus was resurrected, Paul was a religious leader, and he made it his mission to arrest and crucify and kill followers of Jesus, disciples of Jesus. And one day, talk about cynical. One day he's on his way with warrants in hand to go do just that. And he has this moment where he's knocked off his horse and he has this encounter with the person of Jesus, and it changes everything. The Apostle Paul would go from being somebody who persecuted and killed Jesus followers to somebody who traveled the world all around the Mediterranean rim, starting churches and telling everybody about the person of Jesus. He would also go on to write letters to those churches that he had started, and those letters would be wrapped in and included in our Bible. One of the letters he wrote is called Ephesians. In Ephesians chapter 2, Paul describes everything we've been talking about. He describes it this way. He says, God saved you by his grace when you believed. And you can't take credit for it. It's a gift from God. Salvation is not a reward for the good things we've done, so none of us can boast about it. For we are God's masterpiece. He's created us new in Jesus Christ so that we can do the good things that he's planned for us from the very beginning. See, you might not know it. I love that last part. You might not know it, but God has a plan for you that he's just been waiting for you to embrace. He's been waiting to unleash and unhatch in your life. See, before you know God, he knows you. Before it's ever crossed your mind that he might be important, he has singled you out as being important to him. That Jesus came to save you and me by his grace. And that when God looks at you, he sees the masterpiece that he created you to be. That he remembers you, but not for the worst things that you've done, but as the person that he made you to be, that he created you to be, that to live in his love, as the one that he loves and he gave himself for. And when we really come to believe that, that is the moment that everything changes in our heart. That is the moment when we can let go of our cynicism. That is the moment that we can let go of all the hiding and the striving and the clawing our way through the world so that we can surrender to the only one who's worthy of surrendering to, who's worthy of our faith, our trust, and our hope. That's, according to this guy, Paul, that's where we find our salvation. See, the difference between the two thieves, it wasn't what happened to them. It wasn't even how they lived or the bad things that they had done. It was the exchange between them and the guy on the middle cross that changed everything. See, the truth is, and this is just a reality, especially on a day like today, that skepticism and doubt, they're completely understandable. They really are. This is an incredible story. But embracing cynicism, that's a choice. And honestly, when we surrender to God's love, that is the moment that we begin to experience the hope of his salvation. We all have that same choice. I wonder, what is it that you would choose? How is it that you respond? What is the conversation happening between you and God? Between Jesus and your soul? Would you pray with me this morning? God, we're overwhelmed. Just in reading these stories the last couple of weeks, for me, I'm overwhelmed at how broken my own soul is, how cynical and jaded I can be, not just about life, people, but myself and about you. That there's always this tension that causes me to want to run away and pull away, that tells me that you can't be trusted. It tells me that you're just like everyone else. That wants to cut me off from the only one who's the source of life. And so, God, when we come to this day and these moments, there's this built-in hesitancy because none of us want to be played the fool. None of us want to believe in something that's just silly or ridiculous. And yet, Jesus, you show up in this moment as we're being pulled back and forth and look at our own stories of tragedy and cynicism and brokenness and see that there's a God who's bringing beauty and hope and life. And so, Lord, we just want in this moment to open ourselves up to that, to open ourselves up to you. If you're here this morning, and I just want to make a simple invitation. Doesn't matter if this is your, Easter's your thing and you've been in church or you've gone to church or you go to church or this is the first time you've ever gone. That there's a moment here that God's just inviting you into his love and into a relationship with him. And it's not a hard sell at all. But I want to make space for all of us to respond, to set aside, to push through our doubt and our questions. And so I want to invite you this morning, if you know that God's speaking to you and you've had that conversation about cynicism and tragedy, you know all about that. That you know that there's a God that's inviting you to beauty and hope. That Jesus came and he's been whispering into your soul and inviting you to experience love and salvation and freedom. I just want to invite you to pray a simple prayer with me. It's not everything that you and God need to talk about, but it's the beginning of the conversation. And that simple prayer is just, Jesus, I give you my life. Jesus, I give you my life. God is speaking to you this morning. Just pray that prayer. Jesus, I give you my life. I give you my life. God, thank you for love. Thank you for coming for us. Thank you for hope and joy. I pray for every person that's here, for all the ways that they've been betrayed and hurt, for every promise that's been broken. God, for every religious or faith environment that they've been in that betrayed them, that betrayed you, that took advantage of. God, that you would come rushing in and bring healing and life and hope into those spaces. Lord, thank you for today. Thank you for Jesus. In your name we pray. Amen and amen.
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says, every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the third way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because a Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the fourth way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.